We can just go ahead and get started here so we have the normal amount of time for everyone to present. I don't have any major announcements right now. I don't want to surprise her, but I just saw Kelly joined. Kelly, do you have a minute to introduce yourself?
I do.
Yay.
Sorry. Hello, everybody. I'm Kelly Romero-Heaney. I'm the new Assistant Director for Water for Colorado Department of Natural Resources. So yeah, let me be a resource for you and just get me up to speed on things. This is day 6, so I'm still getting up to speed.
Yes. Well, welcome. We're excited to have you. Kelly's in Department of Natural Resources, the Executive Director's Office. So yes, thanks. And it looks like you're in a dark closet.
Yeah, it looks like I'm interrogated. Sorry, I like didn't get my scenes set up.
It's okay. Well, we are going to start off at the Colorado Climate Center. It sounds like, Becky, it is your show. I'm going to send out an announcement or an email to everyone while you get set up here, but I'm going to see if I can hand over controls, or do you have access to controls?
I don't know. I was just finishing up the summary points on my slides, so
okay. We're having all sorts of technical issues, which is great because we only have 11 people to witness this.
Yeah, it says host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Okay. It's weird. I was joined through. Ben, do you know if this meeting is not on the CWC account, if it's on a different one? Because I'm just going to sign out and sign back in.
I don't know that. I'm sorry. Yeah, I just had that GoToMeeting account, and that's all I had for virtual meetings.
Okay.
So yeah, so board meeting was all Vivian, Viola, and then Sam for the roundtables, but I don't have any other sign-ins or anything for this one.
Okay. Well, Becky, you've got a few minutes here. I'm going to see if there's another way to get in.
Sweet.
Thanks for everyone's patience with this. While I find what account it's under. Aha, okay. I'll be right back. I'll join as a host. Okay, Becky, you should have host abilities now.
How does that look?
Great.
Okay. Are you ready for me to start?
Yes, you go ahead.
Okay. Will do. Thank you to those of you who have been able to join despite Megan not being able to figure this out. Just kidding, Megan. I am the Assistant State Climatologist at the Colorado Climate Center with the Colorado State University, and I will be giving a climate update for the state. Let's see if I can get this to work. Okay, so we're gonna kind of look at 2021 water year to date, which starts October 1st, running through now. And the picture that I am sharing there is one that I took looking at looking at the mountains with some smoke and haze. But this picture was from a few weeks ago, and the smoke and haze was actually from the Telegraph fire in Arizona near Phoenix. So a quick look at what we saw in May. The map on the left shows statewide temperature ranks across the lower 48. And for Colorado, you see a 75 in there. We were hovering right around middle of the range of all the years, the 127 years in the record for May of 2021. It officially came out as the 53rd warmest May, and you can see that the last few months in the table, March, April, May, have really ranked right kind of in the middle of the pack. So if we look statewide, we haven't really had a strong direction one way or the other really since November. If we break it down though and look at the state, we're seeing that that average is just really washing out the differences that are happening east of the Continental Divide versus west of the Continental Divide. So this is looking at the departure from normal temperatures for May, and you can see that all along the west slope and down through the San Juan Mountains, we were seeing temperature departures 1 to 2 to 3 degrees above normal for the month. And then across the Eastern Plains and into the Front Range urban corridor, temperatures were a bit closer to average or a little bit below average for the month. This is a pattern that extends back a few months. So this is looking at what has happened over the entire spring period of March, April, May. And this time it's a ranking system instead of compared to average. So you just rank all 100, this one is ranking compared to 1895 to 2010, but you can see that the temperatures all in Western Colorado rank in that top 33rd percentile. So out of 100 years, 67 of them would be cooler for that spring and only 33 would be warmer. And then in Eastern Colorado, the different story is that we either ranked closer to the middle of the pack or in that bottom 33rd percentile. This is looking at the last 30 days, which includes all of June up through the 22nd. And you can see that it's a pattern that has largely continued, although those warmer temperature anomalies have spilled over the Continental Divide and into northern Colorado and the northern Front Range. But we're looking at temperatures that are much warmer than average across all of Western Colorado and our Front Range cities from Colorado Springs and north. And in the Eastern Plains, while they have been above average, not as far above average. And then along the Arkansas Valley, we're looking at temperatures that have been a little bit closer to normal for this time of year. Switching over to precipitation, these are how the statewide averages have ranked for the month of May across the lower 48. Colorado there you see has a 117, which out of 127 years, that means that this May was the 11th wettest on record. And that is the wettest May that we've had since 2015. While we won't call this a miracle May, you can see that since 2015, that's a pretty impressive number. So we have had quite the wet May in many areas of the state. And that was following a dry April, but a wet March. And so you can see how each of the months has ranked out for the entire state. But again, we have a little bit of a divide when we look from the eastern side of the state to the western side of the state. So for May, much of Western Colorado was drier than average, with precipitation mostly ranking from 25% of average to 70% of average, with a little bit more in some areas around Durango, the San Juan Mountains. But really, when you go into the San Luis Valley and then east of the divide, that's where we saw really a ton of precipitation. And so this is largely for areas that are climatologically wet for May. So to see wetter than average is quite impressive. And some of these areas, particularly in the Arkansas Basin, at 200 to 300% of average precipitation for the month. So we'll extend out and look at the entire spring, ranking it from March, April, May. And you see that very clear divide where Western Colorado ranks in the bottom 33rd percentile for precipitation. Some areas, Montrose, Delta, all those areas where you're seeing orange are in the bottom 10th percentile, meaning that out of 100 years, only 10 years would be drier and 90 years would be wetter. So we saw an extremely dry spring for West Slope and Western Colorado. And then as we shift east and go into Eastern Colorado, we see that difference where the spring was quite wet. The darker green, there's 3 shades of green, and that middle green is the top 10th percentile. And then the very dark green is record wettest. So there are areas in Washington County and Kit Carson, Cheyenne counties showing up as the record wettest spring for those areas. And this is a pattern that has continued for much of June. So this is looking at June month to date through June 21st. And where we see greens are areas that have received 1/4 of an inch or more of precipitation. As we get into that teal color and then the blue, we're looking at areas that have seen 1 inch or more of precipitation for the month of June. And while spotty, we do have plenty of areas that have received 1 inch or more for the month of June. And then where we have those oranges are areas that have seen less than 1/10 of an inch. And we do have a couple of areas, Montrose, San Miguel, Routt counties, that have not received any precipitation up into that 3rd week of June. We'll switch over and talk about evaporative demand. So this is the product that is released by NOAA called the Evaporative Demand Drought Index, or EDDI. And what it does is it takes the different components that make up evaporative demand and tell you how different from normal it is for this time of year. So it includes temperature, relative humidity, wind, solar radiation. So when we're talking about dry, hot, and windy conditions, we have high evaporative demand. Now, in the summer, we always have evaporative demand, and that is that the atmosphere wants to take that moisture, any moisture that there is in the ground, and take it up into the atmosphere. And so in the summer, we typically expect to have evaporative losses, but when you see these yellow, orange, and red colors on this map, that means we're seeing even more evaporative demand than we would typically see this time of year. So that 1 week eddy, which comes up to June 19th, shows for northern Utah and throughout Wyoming near record high evaporative demand for this week. And that's starting to bleed over into areas of northern Colorado. And I think that this is a bit of a latent product. It hasn't been updated since, well, it updates every day, but the most recent date that it goes through is last Saturday. And we know we've had a lot of wildfire activity this week. So I expect that we will see as we march through those dates, that these evaporative demand indices will get higher across particularly Western Colorado, where we've seen a lot of that wildfire activity and the red flag warning days. But even extending out into the 1 month, you can see that we do have anomalously high evaporative demand in Northwest Colorado. I'm going to shift over and look at a couple of our coagmet stations. So for those unfamiliar, this is the Colorado Agricultural and Meteorological Network that we maintain in the Colorado Climate Center. And we monitor evaporative demand at specific stations across the state. I'm only going to show 2. That's really going to highlight the differences that we've been seeing from Western Colorado versus Eastern Colorado. So this is our Olathe site in Western Colorado, and the graph on the left is showing that evaporative demand. So how does evaporation, potential evaporation, accumulate across the growing season? So the black line is how the long-term average, how evaporation normally accumulates across the growing season. So you can see by the beginning of June, potential evaporation would be at about 15 inches. And then by the end of June, about 23 inches total accumulated. And then the gray lines are the historical range. And then you can see the lowest one being 2015 in that green. And then the highest evaporative demand was in 1994. And the blue line is where we are tracking for this year currently. So you can see we're kind of competing with that record high evaporative demand year of 1994. So the graph on the right shows the water balance, which takes the difference between the potential evapotranspiration and the precipitation and balances it out. And we know we always have higher potential evapotranspiration than we do precipitation. So that number is always negative going through the growing season. And so that is something that is normal, as you can see from the black line. But the blue line is the current year, which is tracking right along with that, with the worst water balance for a growing season, really tracking along with what occurred in 2018, which was most recent severe drought across Western Colorado. Shifting over into Eastern Colorado, this is our Avondale station in the Arkansas Valley, and a little bit of a different story where you can see that the blue line marking 2021 was tracking near average in early to mid-May, and then there was a bit of a downtick, and now we're seeing that the evaporative demand is staying pretty low for the Arkansas Valley. And shifting over and looking at the water balance, which combines that evaporative demand with the precipitation that has fallen, you can see those little upticks of areas where we've had both precipitation events and downward shifts in evaporative demand mean that our water balance is doing a little bit better than average accumulated for the growing season so far. This is another map that really highlights the differences we're seeing on the west side of the state versus the east side of the state. So this is the Vegetation Drought Response Index, or VegDry. You can find this product on the University of Nebraska-Lincoln website with the link at the bottom. And this is a satellite-derived product. So the satellite is looking at the vegetation, and then it also combines long-term precipitation anomalies into it to come up with this depiction. And so in Western Colorado, you see a lot of yellows, oranges, and reds, which means the vegetation is experiencing severe drought, moderate drought in the vegetation, very dry vegetation. One point of interest you might see is up in Grand County, those northern parts of Grand County along the Continental Divide, I think are showing up especially bad there based on vegetation being burned from the East Troublesome fire. As you move east of the Continental Divide, you start to see a little bit more of a mixed bag, but a lot more near normal and greens showing a little bit more moist vegetation on the eastern plains. And yeah, it's consistent with all the other indicators we are seeing right now. So standardized precipitation index takes the precipitation over different time scales and ranks it, puts it in a normal distribution and tells you how different it is from normal. And then what we've done is we've color coded it to match up with those Drought Monitor categories on the US Drought Monitor. So where you see dots that are yellow would be equivalent to the D0 category. And then all the way to those reds and maroons are equivalent to D3, D4 category level. Although the Drought Monitor includes a whole bunch of different indicators, this is just focused on precipitation. So over the last 30 days, as of June 21st and going back to late May, we are seeing a lot of those drier SPIs popping up over Western Colorado and particularly Northwest Colorado into the Yampa Valley. We've had some very dry SPIs showing up. A little bit drier or closer to average as you shift into the Northern Front Range. And then over the Eastern Plains, we're seeing widespread wetter conditions or closer to average conditions with a couple showing up drier. And if we extend to 60 days to include all of May and into the end of April, you can see that wet spring really popping up in those SPIs across Eastern Colorado and even into the San Luis Valley and the Sangre de Cristos and San Juans down there. And then we're seeing continued dry SPIs over the Colorado River Valley and up into the Yampa Basin. As we extend into these longer time periods, this is 120 days, you can start to see an enhancement of that divide between Eastern Colorado and Western Colorado. Particularly up in the Steamboat area and the Yampa Valley, we're seeing some dry, very dry SPIs on both the short-term and long-term scales. As we extend out into the 9-month, you can see a lot of that D4 category precipitation index popping up throughout Western Colorado. And also in the 12-month, you're seeing it really across the board, but definitely the worst SPIs are now looking from I-70 and then to the north. So let's look at what the Drought Monitor looks like. This is our national map, which was just released this morning. And you can see that Eastern Colorado showing up drought free, and that really extends into a lot of the the high plains there. There's still very bad drought though in the Dakotas. And then where the drought starts, the Colorado main stem and in Western Colorado really extends out through the entire Southwest and into California and the Pacific Northwest. Focusing in on Colorado, this is our current drought depiction that we are seeing, where we have about 18% of our state showing D4 conditions. 41, almost 42% of our state is in some sort of drought designation D1 to D4. And really all of that drought-free area that you're looking at is east of the Continental Divide. these are the changes that have occurred. The map on the left shows what changes have occurred over the last 4 weeks. So where you see green, there have been improvements made to the drought monitor, and where you see yellow, there have been degradations made. So just in the last week, we have seen some degradations over North Park, and also around the Yampa White headwaters, and a little bit other isolated spots in Western Colorado. And some further improvements have been made around South Park and the Eastern Plains. And then just to show you how that's evolved since the start of the calendar year, what we've seen are largely improvements over almost all of the state. That dark blue is the area of 5 category improvements, which were those were areas that were D4 and are now showing nothing. So that is quite the stark difference from what we saw at the beginning of the calendar year. So this is looking at the climate division of Western Colorado, which covers the Colorado drainage basin. So pretty much everything west of the Continental Divide shows up here. And what I'm looking at is how those drought categories have evolved over time since the beginning of 2020. And then you can see how each category takes up a certain percentage of that basin. And so we had D4 introduced into Western Colorado on September 29th, and we've had it there since, which means we've now had 38 consecutive weeks of D4 drought in Western Colorado. And if you just focus on Western Colorado, 80% of that area is in a D3 or D4 drought right now. So do we have any hope of relief coming out of this? Let's take a look. This is the Weather Prediction Center's 7-day precipitation forecast focused in over Colorado and the surrounding areas. So starting today and then going through next Thursday, what is the total accumulated precipitation that is forecasted to fall? And the map on the right shows how that plays out as a difference from average. So you can see anywhere where you've got that medium blue color into the purples would be forecasted to get 1 inch or more of precipitation over the next 7 days. So we got a bit of an active pattern, a lot of areas expected to get a lot of precipitation over the next 7 days. Lowest amounts are showing up around the Colorado-Utah border. And unfortunately in that Four Corners region where almost no precipitation is expected. And then the highest amounts showing up around the San Juan Mountains and into South Park, Middle Park, and the mountains up there, the Park Range. And ample moisture is expected over the Eastern Plains too, all meaning that the majority of the state is forecasted to get above average precipitation over the next 7 days. Key question is that actually going to happen? I wanted to point out that Russ and I are mentoring a student, an undergraduate student from Texas A&M right now, and she is looking at the history of these 7-day precipitation forecasts and trying to figure out how accurate they are, particularly for our region. So this map is a national map, but it's showing that those 7-day forecasts and then minus the observation from PRISM gridded precipitation. And this is looking at specifically what happened in 2018 over July, August, and September. So our monsoon time period. And what you see there is you see some greens across our mountains, the middle of our state, and particularly over the Sangre de Cristos and San Juan Mountains. And what this is saying is that for that time period in 2018, the 7-day precipitation forecast that is released by the Weather Prediction Center was consistently over predicting precipitation that wasn't actually occurring. So this is something important that we're going to research further, and also something to keep in mind as we see those 7-day forecasts over this time period in the summer. Extending out to 8 to 14 days, so this is looking at the first week of July. The Climate Prediction Center is showing temperature and precipitation probabilities. On the left is the probability that temperature will be above average or below average. So for the northwestern part of our state, it is more likely that temperatures will be above average. And then in the southeastern corner, there's a slight leaning for cooler than average temperatures for the beginning of July. Shifting over to precipitation on the right, first week of July, a little bit of a mixed bag. So I would say, looking at this and where Colorado falls with a slight leaning to below average in the Northeast and above average in the Southwest, that they're probably thinking more for our state closer to average precipitation for that week. I do want to point out though that the above average leaning tongue is coming up from the Southwest, indicating that they might be seeing the onset of monsoon moisture coming up there. The seasonal outlook, unfortunately, does not show that. So this is looking at temperature and precipitation probabilities for July, August, and September. And on the left, the temperature shows that most of the region is looking at a higher probability of warmer than average temperatures. And then on the right, we're seeing a higher probability of drier than average conditions extending from the northern Rockies and across parts of northern Colorado. So can we get anything from the El Nino forecast? So this is what is being forecast for El Nino southern oscillation right now. We were in a La Nina, and we have come out of that and gone into what is called ENSO neutral conditions. And that means that the tropical Pacific sea surface temperatures in that area that we watch are really showing up as near average. They're not showing cold anomalies, which would indicate a La Nina, or the warm anomalies that would indicate an El Nino. And the forecast is that ENSO neutral conditions will continue through the summer and entering into the fall. And then there's a lot more uncertainty of what will occur after that. So there is the possibility that we could do a double dip La Nina, but right now the forecast, we don't have a lot of skill in the forecast, and there's a lot of uncertainty. So they're not really making a prediction for what we could expect in the fall yet. So unfortunately, the term that's been going around the last couple of years is the non-soon instead of the monsoon. And the question that I think is everybody is interested in is, will we have a monsoon season? Will we get that moisture that we expect to see in that July, August, September time period coming up through southern Colorado and entering our state? And the question is that right now, there still doesn't appear to be a lot of predictive skill. And unfortunately, the answer is we don't know for sure yet. I did find this briefing put out by the Albuquerque National Weather Service office, and they pointed out that the Four Corners high, the high pressure system that sets over the Four Corners that we really need to set up that monsoon pattern, it hasn't been as stable in the most recent years, largely due to climate change weakening that jet stream pattern. And so what it means is that getting near average precipitation in that time period is going to be harder to come by for New Mexico. And I think that would be a valid statement for Colorado too. This is one of the seasonal prediction tools we have in our tool belt. So this one is a watershed prediction map that you can find at the website listed at the top from NCAR in Boulder. And what it shows is one of the climate models, the CFS, and what the anomalies are for different watershed basins. This one specifically on the 3 to 4 week time period. And the CFS has been pretty consistent, showing that for the next few weeks, it expects above average precipitation over the Four Corners region into Western Colorado, and particularly down in Arizona and New Mexico, suggesting that it sees the onset of monsoon moisture and being pretty consistent with that. Unfortunately, other models in the North American Multi-Model Ensemble, the NMME, have been a little bit less confident. So some are showing drier than average for July, some are showing up wetter. And when you do an ensemble mean of all of them, it's really trending towards near average July precipitation. All right, this is the slide that I didn't get a chance to finish because I was running out of time, but I will finish the summary points and send that completed presentation to Ben and Megan so that it can be up and available. But some of the summary points from what we're seeing is this literal divide from the continental divide between cooler and wetter conditions to the east, drier and warmer to the west. We do know on the Eastern Plains, things can change on a dime. They can change really fast and deteriorate very quickly, especially in the summer with hot temperatures. But right now, some of the wetter soils in the ground seem to be regulating things a little bit more. And unfortunately, in the West, what we're seeing, I think does mean, I think it's contributing to the increased fire activity we're seeing, and could mean continued risk for a lot of fire activity and large wildfires. Many of the indicators are calling for an increased chance of warmer and drier than average conditions across the state for the rest of the summer. Unfortunately, I can't really hang my hat on any predictions for monsoon at this time. While there are some indications that it might be on its way and arriving, and that we will get the moisture from it, there are other things showing up that reduce the confidence in that forecast. So stay tuned, and hopefully we have some more definitive information during the next Water Availability Task Force. That is all that I have.
Thanks, Becky. You might need to hand back the controls to me, but Jason did ask a question here. He's curious if a difference between east and west has been seen recently, or is this the starkest difference? Oh, do you mean, Jason, do you just mean precipitation in general?
Yeah, I'm talking more along the lines of everything, right? Evaporative soil moisture, drought, possibility wildfire. Has there, in anyone's memory, has there been such a stark difference between east and west? I know we have differences, but this seems like one of the biggest ones, but I'm just curious. I haven't been here that long.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think to have such a consistent difference, I think is definitely more noticeable this year than what we've seen in the recent past. I do think that we had a little bit of this situation in 2018, but not quite as stark. And so I think that this is something that is not really typical. definitely not out of the realm of possibility, especially when you consider how the Continental Divide and those high mountain ranges really play in the setup of large scale events. It's just easier for one side of the mountains to get something and the other side to miss out. So I do think it's a good question, but I agree. I think this one is a little bit more stark and unusual than what would be typical for those differences.
Okay, great. Thank you, Becky.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. And Becky, can you select my name and choose host?
Is it
in the chat as I continue to stumble my way through this?
Oh, I see. You made me a host, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that was really helpful, especially kind of the extra information. And I'm curious, how long are you working with that student on the 7-day forecast project?
So we have her for about 10 weeks total, and we're getting close to the halfway point. So thankfully, she has been amazing at developing all these maps. So I think now we're really at this analysis time, and we'll be able to spend the next 4 or 5 weeks doing a lot of analysis and getting ready for her presentation. So I think we're going to have some really interesting results to share with that.
Thanks. Okay, Carl, you should now have presentation.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Sometimes I have weird issues with my Bluetooth headphones messing with my microphone, but I will go ahead and share. Share all windows, see if that works. And can you see that now?
Not yet on my end.
No. Yeah, it's not letting me select. There we go. Try this.
There you go.
Okay, cool. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Megan and Ben and everyone for joining. Go through kind of our pretty standard roundabout. I did go ahead for this month and probably going forward until winter, remove all the snow products. As of pretty recently, all SNOTEL sites in the state are snow free. Tower up by Steamboat was the last to melt out relatively recently. So that means, snow line's probably getting up above 12,000 feet at this point. We were down in the San Juans last week, and there was some patchy snow around 11.5, but yeah, so that's been a good thing. We've been having crews out the last several weeks, starting to hammer out all our SNOTEL maintenance and get ready for next year, which is great. But yeah, I will just kind of start going through the basins per usual, and then a statewide summary. So up in Northwest Colorado in the combined Yampa and White River basins, they ended up with some of the more meager May precipitation in the state at just 67% of average. June to date has been 29% of average. And we'll see a lot of the same trends that Becky was talking about, with some of the May values being a lot more muted, with, as she noted, the plains kind of received more preferential precipitation in May relative to the mountains. But yeah, let's keep on going. So looking at our individual SNOTEL sites, pretty meager. We've got one, I think we may have a data issue with this. This is Elk River up north of Steamboat. I'll need to take a look at that. I doubt that is an actual value there, but really across most of our SNOTEL sites, pretty meager precipitation, 138% of average here on Willow Creek Pass. but several zeros as well in the southern portions of the basin. All that has left the water year-to-date precipitation at 69% of average in the Yampa White. And again, you can see pretty dry, some through May, but pretty much flatlined through June to date so far. And in some of these graphs, you will notice like this has a little bit of a drop. So during our maintenance season, it's kind of a juggling act to keep up. So there will be some little quirks in the data as we keep up on making adjustments post maintenance, but still shouldn't be huge and provide a pretty good picture. Looking at our June 1st Streamflow forecasts, definitely pretty thin. Some of the major points here, Yampa at Maybell, just 31% of average volume for the April through July period. White at Meeker, 37%. One of the better ones, North Platte at Northgate at 47% of average, but unfortunately that water does not stay in the state for very long at all past that point. Reservoir storage, again, per usual, not a ton of storage in the Yampa White, but doing pretty good. Above average, it looks like maybe 105 to 110% of average and probably a little over 90% of capacity. So that is a good thing. Moving a little south into the upper Colorado River Basin. May had a bit better precipitation, but not as good as some of its neighbors to the south at 91% of average. June has remained extremely dry, receiving just 12% of average precipitation over the last 3 weeks or so. Looking at our month-to-date precipitation at individual sites, so you can see it kind of reflects that 12% value. A couple sites along the Continental Divide seem to receive some of the better values. Again, Willow Creek Pass is represented here as well, a couple 44% of average. But really in the central and more western parts of the basin, very, very little June precipitation so far. All that has left the water year-to-date precipitation at 75% of the average value. And you can, again, see the first half of May did okay, but essentially kind of flatlined from the last week of May to date with just very, very minimal amounts of accumulation. Looking at our actual Streamflow forecasts for June 1st, definitely a little better up in the main stem headwaters. Dillon Reservoir inflow was for 55% of average, Willow Creek 70% of average, Granby 76, but kind of just gets lower and lower down the further down you get in the basin going further west. Kind of one of our major pour points before it hits the Gunnison, the Colorado Cameo. It's forecasted for 48% of average April through July volumes. And also same value for the Roaring Fork, a little upstream. Reservoir storage in the upper Colorado, fairly good news, above 90% of average storage and looks like about 70–75% of total capacity. So hopefully that should allow for a little bit of a buffer and water management throughout the rest of the summer. Looking at our long-term trends here, again, over the last several years, it's been up and down, but relatively near average conditions compared to some of our major droughts like 2012 and 2002. But throughout this kind of latter half of the water year, we can see a steady drop in that reservoir storage. Over into the South Platte, coming off the east side of the Northern Front Range, had quite a bit better May precipitation than the last two basins we're looking at 130% of average, which was good to see. But par for the course, really across the state, June has remained quite dry, receiving just 21% of average precipitation at our mountain stations. Individual station data here, kind of just all the way up the Continental Divide, more or less. It's like some missing data up north, but really the highest one we've got is a 44% of average accumulation. Many stations receiving nothing, but quite dry overall. The good news for the South Platte is on a water year basis, it remains to receive, I believe, the highest in the state so far, as has been pretty consistent throughout the year. Currently 92% of average water year accumulated precipitation. You can see a really pretty consistent second half of April and through May, but really dried out throughout the entirety of June. Similar, as you would imagine, following snowpack and precipitation trends. Some of the best streamflow forecasts we've seen in the state are in the South Platte here, further up north in particular, which I believe are some of the only forecasts that were for above average volumes for that April-July period. But generally above 90%, or we've got down the South Platte at South Platte 79, but not exceptional, but relative to the rest of the state, definitely some of the more encouraging streamflow forecasts we have. Looking at reservoir storage, pretty good overall. You can see pretty consistent. Really, most of the individual reservoirs are at above average values, as well as the basin-wide total. Looks like to be in the range of maybe 110% of average reservoir storage and about 90% of total capacity. Looking at our long-term trends here, you can see the huge spike in 2019 and kind of a steady drop, but it is one of the basins that has been able to have a net gain in reservoir storage throughout this current water year 21. So that is great to see, leaving us currently at those above average storage levels. Moving back west into the Gunnison Basin, kind of moving into some of the areas that have really been consistently drier, not only this water year, but last water year as well. Throughout May, had near average precipitation accumulation at 94%. June, quite dry again, not as terrible as other basins, but still just 35% of average, which is really not a lot considering that June is typically one of our drier months overall. So that really represents a pretty small amount. See kind of in the southern portions and northern portions received minimal. Couple stations here kind of on the eastern boundary of the Gunnison Basin that have received some, but again, as far as actual quantity of precipitation, that still doesn't represent a ton. That could be achieved by just like 1 or 2 thunderstorms to get up to those values. Looking at our entire water year, all of this has left us at 71% of average total water year precipitation in the Gunnison Basin. Similar trends. So you can see there's those couple storms through May, but really since the last week or two in May, to date has remained rather dry, averaged across all of our stations in the Gunnison. Going into our streamflow forecasts, definitely pretty dry. Some of our major points, Blue Mesa inflows for 47% of average, Uncompahgre 38% at Kelowna. But really at the main outlet here, we can really see some extremely low volumes. The Gunnison at Grand Junction, just 32, it looks like 32 or 33% of average April through July streamflow volumes. So very minimal outlet as it confluences with the Gunnison and Grand Junction. And I've got a couple slides at the very end that'll kind of put some of these numbers into more perspective as well. Reservoir storage, as would be expected and kind of unfortunately in Southwest Colorado where things have been driest, reservoir storage is a lot less than it has been in Northern Colorado. Looks to be in the range of about 75% of average and maybe a little over 50% of total capacity across the Gunnison. And you can see the biggest reservoir in the basin and biggest reservoir in the state, Blue Mesa, just 60% of average and a little over 40% of capacity in Blue Mesa. And looking again at our long-term trends here, did get a bit of a boost at the beginning of the water year, but it's been pretty steady decline in reservoir storage. And we'll see this in the bar chart at the end, that the Gunnison over the last month has had the biggest drop in reservoir storage of anywhere in the state. And you can see it is notable. 18 was bad, but some of our other big considerable drought years, 2012 and 2002, we're starting to get down into the range of some of these lower storages we've seen since 1992. Further down into far southwest Colorado, the combined San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, and San Juan basins. May did pretty good, above average precipitation at 111%. Fortunately, June has actually received some of the better precipitation in the state at 53% of average, but not to say it's better relative to a lot of basins, but still not an incredible amount of precipitation coming down in the mountains. Looking at individual stations, quite a bit of variability here. And again, you can kind of see how that would average out to that 55% number. We've got one outlier, Columbus Basin here in the La Plata Mountains, west of Durango. That could be a random thunderstorm, or that could be a data issue we need to investigate. But it looks like perhaps there have been some maybe spotty thunderstorms hitting some stations and not others. So quite a bit of variability. So currently, all that has left the total water year accumulation at 69% of average, which this green line is 2020. So really pretty similar to what we observed last year. We can see that one big jump in mid to late May there, which I'm assuming is what hit kind of different stations here and there, but has really, really dried out since that accumulation. And what I was mentioning here, these two lines in the middle are normal lines, so you can kind of see how it really flattens out, with June being one of our driest months historically in the mountains. So even these low percentages, that's really not much accumulation to achieve even what we're seeing. Going into our volumetric streamflow forecasts, some of the bigger ones, the San Juan leaving the state there, forecasted for 54% of average volumes. Animas at Durango for 43% of average. Why am I not seeing San Miguel at Placerville? But I'd assume it's San Miguel at Placerville is probably in that 25 to 30% range. You know, one notable one, the McPhee inflow on the Dolores for just 26% of average. And I recall we got a report from the field down there that they definitely have some pretty major concerns about reservoir management and possibly hitting dead pool. And I've been watching those inflows, and they're definitely quite meager so far. So that'll be a challenging situation down in Southwest Colorado for the rest of the summer. So reservoir storage, again, with kind of the multi-year drought compounding is a really big challenge down there. And we saw that not only with soil moisture, but also with the reservoir storages, less than 60% of average, probably about 50% of capacity averaged across the major reservoirs in those Southwest basins. So here's looking at our long-term trends. And we can really, again, see how the effect of that multi-year drought jumps out, where last year's melt out, there's really, it kind of flatlined, but really no increase to storage last year and dropped. And then this year kind of barely increased and is dropping down again. So yeah, we are getting down into the range of some of those kind of 4 lowest years since 1992 with respect to reservoir storage. So something certainly to watch very closely going forward. Over a little east into the upper Rio Grande Basin. Good news down there. The Rio Grande had one of the better, if not the best, May precipitation accumulation in the mountains at 162% of average. June to date has been 53% of average. So pretty much exactly the same as our other combined Southwest basins. But really good news about the May precipitation in the Rio Grande. Looking at the individual stations, kind of a mixed bag. It looks like kind of the southern half of the basin, a lot of stations fared a little bit better, with one up here. Maybe this is Cochetopa Pass at 98% of average. Kind of a mixed bag, but about as good as anywhere in the state with respect to June to date so far. Current water year-to-date precipitation has been 85% of average. So kind of middle of the pack as far as all of our major basins. And again, you can see that pretty substantial May accumulation with a big storm cycle mid to late month, and then really kind of leveling out through June, which is par for the course, unfortunately, in Colorado this month. Looking at our Streamflow forecasts from June 1st, definitely better, substantially better than we saw in our Southwest basins and the Gunnison, which is good to see. You know, some of the more important ones, Rio Grande at Del Norte for 64% of average. And I know that's a really important one for the Rio Grande compact, so good to have that information. A little bit higher up in the basin, but not too great. But yeah, like that Del Norte gauge is a really, really important one as it heads further down into the southern San Luis and on into New Mexico. Reservoir storage, more similar to the San Miguel, Animas Dolores, San Juan. Looks like a little less than 70% of average storage, and maybe about 25% of total capacity in the Rio Grande. Going into our long-term trends, not quite the plummet we saw in its neighbors to the west, but did get a boost through the previous water year and has kind of tapered off, but certainly not as dramatically as we've seen in other places. So going into our final major basin here over in the Arkansas, May fared pretty well, not quite as good as the Rio Grande, but received 154% of average precipitation at our mountain snowtell stations. Also similarly, June to date has been, in a relative sense, pretty good at 58% of average. Not great, but a lot better than many, many other basins. Looking at our individual stations, similar to the Rio Grande, kind of a mixed bag of what we're seeing here. And I guess I'm assuming that's related to just kind of isolated storms hitting here and not there. On the water year basis, doing pretty good. Up there with the South Platte, I think those have received the top 2 water year precipitation accumulations, so currently at 92% of average. Going into our Streamflow forecasts, due to, as we've mentioned many times over the this current water year, you know, these forecasts don't really line up with the snowpack and precipitation values you've seen due to the antecedent dry soil moisture conditions. But looking at some of our major points, 73% at Salida, 66% of average inflow at Pueblo. The Purgatory this definitely has the best, 109%. These southern sangres have fared surprisingly well throughout the entire winter with both snowpack and precipitation, so that's good to see for folks who rely on the water down there. Reservoir storage looks to be about 75% of average and a little less than 30% of capacity in the Arkansas. So long-term trends here, pretty steady since the steady decline for the most part since the start of water year 2020. Just recently, over the last several months, we have seen a bit of an increase here, which is encouraging. So hopefully they'll be able to utilize those water resources to the best of their ability. So we'll kind of do a full statewide summary now. And going into this, as you know, Becky noted, and the question that was asked to Becky, a lot of these big picture statewide summaries certainly don't paint the picture with a lot of the huge differences east to west and north to south. But across the whole state, May precipitation was 109% of average. June to date was just 34% of average so far. And some of the maps that I'll show will kind of paint these pictures a little more objectively of what's going on in individual areas. So here's our month-to-date precipitation at individual SNOTEL stations. As you can see, a lot of red out there. Fortunately, southern Colorado has generally received a bit more than northern Colorado. Not to say everybody doesn't deserve it, but southern Colorado has been quite dry the last few years, so that's good to see them receiving anything they can, but really, really quite dry across all of northern Colorado over the last 3 weeks or so. Statewide, water year-to-date precipitation currently at 78% of average. And that's, as a relative metric, that is 92% of what it was last year. So again, you can see this green line is water year 2020. So that can also sometimes be a useful anecdote. So we're just sitting a little drier than we were last year at this point. So here's the map of our water year precipitation. And it's followed similar trends really throughout the year. Arkansas and South Platte being the best at 92% of average water year. Then kind of all of Western Colorado generally being quite a bit drier. All of these being, looks like 69 to 75% of average across pretty much the entire Western slope, everything in the greater Colorado basin, with the Rio Grande and North Platte sitting slightly better. Again, following the same trends here, just kind of the roundabout of our Streamflow forecasts. Really everything in the greater Colorado is looking at pretty meager Streamflow forecasts, and we have observed that, which I'll show a couple maps here in a minute, with the northern Front Range and the far southern basins of the Arkansas kind of doing the best. So here's our reservoir storage summary map. Currently statewide is 84% of average, but again, it really just matters where you are. It's really, really important to just focus on the individual basins. And again, the effect of the multi-year drought situation definitely impacting southern Colorado, with generally northern Colorado faring a lot better, and the South Platte holding the most reservoir storage relative to average currently. So here we can see our trends throughout the year. So each one of these bars for the basins represents the percent of average storage each month. Some basins remain pretty steady. As I mentioned earlier, you can really see this big drop in the Gunnison over the last month. I'm guessing that's largely coming from Blue Mesa. I haven't checked the time series of individual basins, but huge drop in the Gunnison. Biggest increase in the last month is in the South Platte, with currently just the South Platte and the Yampa White being the only basins with above average reservoir storage. Long-term trends in storage, really again, see that effect of the multi-year drought here. Pretty steady decline over the last 2 years or so. Not much increase last spring. Not much increase this year, and kind of net storage starting to barely drop off over the last several months. Looking at our SWASI here, definitely kind of compiling a lot of this different information into this one metric really makes it jump out how dry things are. And we saw this reflected in Becky's Drought Monitor map, but a lot of things well below -3 across really the entire western slope. And that's on a scale with -4.2 being the lowest. So compiling a lot of this into the SWASI metric really does make it jump out, the kind of holistic drought situation that we're looking at, again, as expressed by the Drought Monitor maps as well. So I put in some of just a couple maps here of some of our April and May observed stream flow values to put things in perspective. We did see across the western slope drops in our from our May 1st forecast to our April 1st forecasts. And just for everyone's knowledge, the majority of those forecasts do include the previous months observed and then add a future forecast onto it. So we have been really observing extremely low stream flows over the last 2 months. And here over the next week, we'll have our observed June as well. But just looking at the graphs of daily CFS and stuff, things have remained extremely low. But just some of our major points, Gunnison at Grand Junction, it's just been 34% of average observed stream flow over those 2 months. Pretty much the same. I think that's 45, or I think that's 45, or yeah, I think that's 45 for the Animus at Durango. Very low. I think that's the La Plata in the 30s. Yampa at Maybell, another major one, just 36% of average observed. I think this is Blue Mesa inflow, 46% of average observed inflow. So really those forecasts and the concerns about the dry soils really have been seeming to pan out, and flows continue to drop across the western slope in particular. And so this is a little more cluttered, but I wanted to get some points in Arizona and Utah in here. So what we're looking at here is this is our minimum rank compared to the period of record. So instead of just looking at what the percent of average volume is, not to end on the not a very uplifting note, but there's definitely some pretty shocking things to put it into context. So most of the points that stream flow points I'll point out here have in the range of 105 to 115 plus years of record. So this is the minimum rank. So Yampa at Maybell is the second lowest. I believe that's compared to 105 years of record observed for those 2 months. Gunnison Grand Junction is the third lowest, I think on maybe 117, all over 100, but third lowest in over 100 years. Animus at Durango, fifth lowest in over 100 years. Then kind of doesn't affect Colorado water users, but in the bigger picture, it really extends across the greater upper Colorado basin. So this is the Green River at Green River, Utah, third lowest. I think that was in 117 years. And really the big one is here. This is claimed to be at Glen Canyon Dam, but it is our adjusted stream flow values for reservoir storage. So this is essentially Lake Powell inflow. And that has been observed to be the third lowest, and I think that was 112 years maybe. So certainly some pretty shocking values to put things into context. So not to end on a bit of a bummer note, but it is really important for folks to know that these stream flows we've been observing this spring have been on the exceptionally low end of things. So a quick summary. Again, all SNOTEL sites are now free of snow, and we're out and about getting our maintenance done, getting ready for next winter. May was pretty good across most basins, with the exception of the Yampa and White for the most part. But June has reverted back to quite dry conditions, just 34% of average accumulated mountain precipitation. So I just mentioned those low observed April-May stream flows had further dropped the forecasts, but at this point, I think it's more just about as much about just the observed stream flows and just knowing they're really not coming back up substantially at this point. With respect to the forecasts, the South Platte was really the only basin that showed a considerable increase from the May 1st to June 1st forecasts. I believe the Arkansas showed a slight increase. Maybe the Rio Grande showed a slight increase, but we're pretty similar, but with more drops really across the western slope. So I did pull some quick statistics on those observed April and May observed stream flows. So about half of our forecast points in the state were in the bottom 20th percentile of those observed flows. And again, I just threw out some of those statistics relative to the period of record as well. And again, statewide reservoir storage is 84% of average, but certainly varies a lot basin to basin, with the southern basins holding the lowest amounts in general. So that is all I had, and I am happy to take any questions if anyone has them.
Thanks, Carl. Does anyone have questions? That was helpful. If you could send your presentation to me, I can make sure to get it in our summary for this month.
Yep, will do.
Thanks. Okay, so since we do have a smaller crowd, we can go through water provider updates for whoever's on the phone. And for those who have joined since we first started, I had neglected to send out a reminder email, so we don't have as many providers as we normally do on the phone, but I'll make sure to follow up with folks after. Does anyone want to kick off their summary from their own region here? Brian, I saw you on mute. I'm going to hand it to you.
All right, thanks. This is Brian Fitzpatrick, City of Aurora. We are currently at 82% of storage capacity, and our average for this time of year is 80, so doing well there. Our usage is 89% of last year, attributed obviously to the really wet May. I would like to point out quickly that Aurora's raw water supply is about half of our water comes from the South Platte Basin, 25% from the Colorado Basin, and 25% from the Arkansas. So we are obviously pretty concerned about the conditions on West Slope, and we're cognizant of that. But anyway, we're in good shape for right now. Thank you.
This is Isabel at the City of Boulder. Our reservoirs, our storage reservoirs are currently full, which is great. Again, that was in part due to the late snow and the really wet May. So, and I'm just trying to look at the latest numbers that I have for usage. I think overall it's been a little bit lower compared to last year. Let's see if I can pull this up here. I just have through May. The May water usage was about 30% lower in 2021 compared to last year, and lower than our 5-year monthly average. So right now we're doing pretty well.
Good to hear. Thanks for that. Let's see. Colorado Springs, Katie, do you want to provide any updates?
Yeah, hi everyone. This is Katie Nazarowski with Colorado Springs Utilities. So right now, our reservoirs are sitting at about 82.2% of capacity, and our average for this time of year from 2001 to 2020 is 74.7. So we're at about 7.5% higher than average for this time of year. Our total water usage for both the 2019 water year and the 2020 water year was higher than what we've seen to date this year by a pretty significant amount. So, and again, that's probably attributed to the super wet May that we had, but demands have started to pick up again to their kind of average levels for us. Probably the past week and a half, we saw a pretty significant drop in a lot of our diversions. So we're probably getting near the end of runoff, or at least the tail end of that. And I think that's about all I have for my end.
Thanks. Anyone else? Jason, do you have updates?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I'll do updates for Denver Water first, and then I'll talk about the Front Range Drought Coordination Group. So first for Denver Water, just like everyone else has been saying on the Front Range providers, we are good in reservoir storage. We've got 96% of fill in our storage. Normally, historical median this time of year is 95, so we're above average for that. Demand was lower in April and May. It was 86% of normal in April, 91% of normal in May. But already in June, we're at 107% over. So we'll have to see how we end out June, but it looks like we will end out over just with the hot weather we've had. And yeah, just like Aurora was saying, 50% of our water is from the South Platte, 50% is from the Colorado River system. So we really are looking, you know, with concern at the Western Slope and just kind of wondering what 2022 will bring us. We've already seen our flows on the Western Slope go down significantly just in the last week or two. So we're already starting to see that. And as was mentioned earlier, on the Eastern Slope, things can change very fast. So we've still got an eye on it, but for right now, we are doing okay. And now I'll move over to the Front Range Drought Coordination Group. As you guys might remember, I'll just give a quick background. In January, we decided Denver Water and Aurora Water partnered together to create two, at that time, coordination groups, a Denver Aurora Metro Coordination Group for drought and a Front Range Drought Coordination Group. Over time, we realized that the two groups were very similar in what they did, and there were similar memberships, so we just combined them into one group, the Front Range Drought Coordination Group. And this is made up of water providers all the way from Fort Collins and Northern Water down to Pueblo and all the major and medium providers along the way. We also have some Western Slope participants in that. The last meeting was the first meeting where we really saw a noticeable drop in participation, which you would have just guessed what happened. Everyone's so busy that you've got to prioritize where you go. And a lot of these providers on the Eastern Slope, especially some of the more medium and smaller ones, do not get any water from the West Slope. So they're looking really good. And so they have kind of dropped off. So participation is down, but those that are still in it, obviously still have a very much a concern and a need to discuss. And so what we've been talking about lately is how do we communicate to our customers that although it had been so incredibly wet and cool and cloudy, how do we communicate to them that we're still have a concern for the Western Slope, that the Western Slope is in terrible drought and we still need to conserve. And so that's what we've been talking about. We had a great conversation on the Live Like You Love It kind of communications campaign. Very exciting. We were able to do a survey with them to kind of see what things that they might be able to provide and what water providers need. So moving into the future on that. And then we're just going to continue to talk about communication messages. What general messages can we all use that ensure that we take care of our Western Slope partners and communicate and educate our customers? So it's been good. I think participation will continue to go down, and that's just the way that these things work, and it's no problem at all. And we'll just kind of keep planning for the future. All right, that's it, Megan.
Thanks for that update. Who else do we have? Anyone else? I think there's a question in the chat that I could address. I don't see any other folks with water provider updates, but there was a question from Walt about who basically takes the information and that is presented in these meetings and responds to it, which many of you do know, but and I'm happy to provide you with some more detailed information after this, Walt. But essentially, this task force is the Water Availability Task Force meets monthly, regardless of drought plan activation. So whether we're in drought conditions or not, we are always receiving information from the incredible folks at the Colorado Climate Center and NRCS to stay aware of current conditions. And thus, this information is then funneled to a drought task force during activated drought times, which is comprised of directors at different state agencies to take in this information, stay up to date. And we also distribute the updates that we get here to our other task forces that are activated during drought times. Right now, we have a municipal impact task force and an agricultural impact task force, and both of those are activated by the drought plan as needed to respond and be reactive to conditions and needs on the ground. during active drought time. So I know that's super high level, but happy to dig into that more with you one-on-one. So this information is the monthly just summary that we get, so that any water provider around the state, this is a public meeting, anyone can call in and hear these updates directly from our climate professionals here in Colorado. With that said, Walt had mentioned he had some issues. So if you have any other follow-up questions, just feel free to email me. He had some issues with his microphone. Are there any other questions for our presenters or each other before closing this meeting? Okay. I will promise to do a better job about getting that announcement out next month and follow up with a summary here and make sure everyone has a link to today's meeting so that they can review these conditions updates for this month as well. Thank you to our presenters and for those who are able to join today. Have a great afternoon. Thanks, Becky. To be fair, Ben's been doing this since for many years, and so there are bound to be some hiccups here in the transition.
I second that, Megan. You're doing phenomenal. You have really jumped right into this over the last, what has it been, 15 months, 18 months? You've done it just
yeah. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, Megan, you're doing fine. Don't beat yourself up too much here.
I was learning our notification system, but yes, we'll get back to normal programming very soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Megan. Bye.
Thank you.